Hey everybody, sorry I'm getting this out later than usual. I was out of town this week and I got back in last night, and so I'm now just getting a chance to sit down and read this. So I'm sorry about that, but here is part 3, chapter 3rd from the story of King Arthur and his knights. Okay, so how King Arthur encountered 4 knights and of what befell thereby. Now the day was extraordinarily sweet and pleasant unto one so lusty of frame and so lilth of heart as was good King Arthur. For the bright clouds swam smoothly across the blue sky and the prodigious volumes of vapor, and the wind blew across the long grass of the meadowlands and across the fields of that growing wheat, and so that a multitude of waves traveled over the hills and valleys and it were across an entire sea of green. And now all of the earth would be darkened in wide shadows from those clouds, and anon everything would burst out of a sudden into a wonderful radiance of sunlight once more, and the little birds that sang all gaily in the hedgerows and the leafy thickets as though they would burst their tiny throats with singing, and the cock crowed strong and lusty from the farm croft, and all was so blithe and comely that the young king, with the visor of his helmet uplifted to the refreshment of the gentle breeze, would sometimes carol very joyously in his journeying. So traveled King Arthur in all that gay and tender summer season, when the earth was young and the time was of long gone by. Now you are to remember that when King Arthur had come from Carlion unto the castle of Tintagilon, he had brought with him 4 young knights for to bear him company. And those knights aforesaid were as follows. There was Sir Gawain, the son of King Lot and of Queen Margussie, and there was Sir Ewain, the son of King Uriens and the Queen Morgana le Fay. And these 2 were nephews, half in blood unto the king. And there was Sir Pelleas, and there was Sir Geraint, the son of Urban. And there were the 4 noble young knights who had come with King Arthur from Camelot unto Tintagilon. Now to befell, as King Arthur rode all gaily in the summertime as foresaid, that he had came to a certain part of the road where he beheld before him a tall and comely tower, and stood upon a green hillock immediately by the roadside. And lo, there stood upon the balcony of that tower 3 fair damsels, clad in green taffeta. And on the high road in the front of the castle there was a knight, clad all in very fine armor. And the knight sat upon a noble war horse, and in his hands he held a lute, and he played upon the lute, and he sang in a voice of extraordinary sweetness. Whilst he sang, those 3 ladies in green taffeta listened to him with a great cheerfulness of mind. And whenever the knight would stint his singing, then those 3 ladies would clap their hands together with great acclaim, and would bid him to sing them again, and so he would do with great readiness of spirit. All of this King Arthur beheld, and it appeared to him to be a very pleasant sight, wherefore he rejoiced at it exceedingly. And as he drew nigh, lo, he beheld that the knight who thus sat upon his horse and played upon the lute, and sang unto the accompaniment thereof, was none other than Sir Geraint, the son of Urban. For that knight wore upon his crest the figure of a griffin, and the device upon his shield was 2 griffins rampant facing one another upon a field azure. And King Arthur knew that this was the crest and the device of Sir Geraint. And when the king perceived who was the knight who sat there and sang, he laughed unto himself, and straightway closed his visor, and made him ready for such an encounter at might perchance befall. So he drew nigh to where the knight sang, and the ladies listened. Now, when King Sir Geraint perceived King Arthur approach, he ceased singing, and he hung up his lute behind him across his shoulder. Then, casting upward his look to those fair ladies above him, quoth he, Madams, ye have been pleased to listen to this singing, which I have essayed altogether in your honor. Now, likewise, in your honor, I will perform a deed of knightly prowess, which I very much hope shall bring great glory to you. For if ye will be pleased to lend me the encouragement which your very great beauty can easily afford, ye shall behold me, I doubt not, overthrow yonder knight completely, and that your great credit and renown. Sir knight, said the lady who spoke for the others, you are truly a lord of noble bearing and exceedingly pleasing of address. Wherefore we do wish you great success in this undertaking, and we do believe that you will succeed in which you essay to do. Upon these Sir Geraint gave those 3 damsels great thanks for their words, and thereupon he closed the visor of his helmet. So dressing his spear and shield, and saluting those 3 ladies with great humility of demeanor, he went forth to meet King Arthur, where he now sat at a little distance, very quietly and soberly awaiting his pleasure. Now Sir Geraint knew not King Arthur, because he wore not crest upon his helm, and no device upon his shield. Wherefore, as he saluted him, he made speech to him in this wise: Ha, monsieur, I know not who thou art, seeing that thou bearest neither crest nor device. Natheless, I am minded to do thee such honor as I may in running a tilt with thee upon the behalf of those 3 damsels whom thou beholdest yonder upon the balcony. For I do affirm, and am ready to maintain the same with my knightly person, that those ladies are fairer than thy lady, whomsoever she may be. Sir knight, quoth King Arthur, I will gladly run a course with thee in honor of my lady, for I may tell thee she is a princess, and is held by many to be the most beautiful dame in all of the world. But I will only be contend with thee upon one condition, and the condition is this, that he who is overthrown shall yield himself as a servant unto the other for 7 days, and in that time he shall do all that may be required of him. I will accept thy gage, Sir Unknown Knight, quoth Sir Geraint, and when I have overthrown thee, I will yield thee unto these fair ladies yonder, for to be their servant for 7 days. And I do tell thee that there are a great many knights who would certainly regard that as being both a pleasant and honorable task. And I should so chance as to overthrow thee, said King Arthur, I will send thee for to serve my lady for the same period of time, and that will be even a pleasanter and more honorable task than that which thou hast a mind for me to perform. So each knight saluted the other, and thereupon each took such a stand as should cast the encounter immediately beneath where those 3 fair damsels looked down from the balcony. Then each knight dressed his spear and his shield, and having made ready for the encounter, each sat for a small space, entirely prepared. Then each shouted to his war horse, and drave spur into his flank, and launched forth with wonderful speed to the assault, so that they met in the very midst of the course with a force so vehement that the noise thereof was wonderfully appalling for to hear. And each knight smote the other in every centre of his defiances, and lo, the spear of Sir Geraint burst into small pieces, even to the truncheon thereof. But the spear of King Arthur held, and Sir Geraint was cast so violently backward that both he and his horse were overthrown into the dust with a tumult like to a monstrous roaring of thunder. And when Sir Geraint had recovered his footing, he was, for a while, so astonished that he wist not where he stood. For never had he ever been so overthrown in all of his life before. Then coming quickly unto himself again, he straightway drew forth his sword, and called upon King Arthur with exceedingly vehemence for to come down from his saddle, and to fight him afoot. Nay, not so, Sir Knight, said King Arthur, I will not do with thee in that way. Moreover, thou art not to forget that thou hast promised to give thyself unto me as my servant for 7 days, for assuredly I have entirely overcome thee in this encounter, and now thou art pledged unto me to be my servant. Then Sir Geraint knew not what to say, being altogether abased with shame and vexation at his overthrow. Natheless he perceived that he must uphold his knightly word unto that which he had pledged himself to do. Wherefore he put up his sword again, though with exceeding discontent. Sir Knight, said he, I do acknowledge myself to have been overcome in this encounter, wherefore I yield myself now unto thy commands according to thy plighted word. Then I do place my commands upon thee in this wise, quoth King Arthur. My command is that thou goest straightway unto the Lady Guinevere at Camelard, and that thou tellest her that thou hast been overthrown by the knight to whom she gave her necklace as a token. Moreover, I do desire that thou shalt obey her in everything that she may command thee to do, and that for the space of 7 days to come. Sir Knight, quoth Sir Geraint, that which thou biddest me to do I will perform according to thy commands. Thereupon he mounted his horse, and he went his way, and King Arthur went his way, and those 3 ladies who stood upon the balcony of the castle were exceedingly glad that they had beheld so noble an assay at arms as that which they had looked down upon. Now, after King Arthur had traveled forward for the distance of 2 or 3 leagues or more, he came into a certain place of the moorlands, where there were many ditches of water, and where the heron and the marten sought harborage in the sedge. And here at the sun-dry points were several windmills, with the sails all turning slowly in the sunlight, before a wind which blew across the level plains of ooze. And at this place there was a long, straight causeway, which 2 long rows of pollard willows, one upon either hand. Now, when he had come nigh in the middle of this causeway, King Arthur perceived 2 knights, who sat there on their horses in the shade of a great windmill that stood upon one side of the roadway. And a large shadow of the sails moved ever and anon across the roadway as the wheel of the mill turned slowly afore the wind. And all about the mill and everywhere about were the great quantities of shallows, and darted hither and thither like bees about a hive in midsummer. And King Arthur saw that those 2 knights, as they sat in the shadow of the mill, were eating of a great loaf of rye bread, fresh baked, and a brittle of crust. And they ate fair white cheese, which things the miller all white with dust served to them. But when these 2 knights perceived King Arthur, they immediately ceased eating and the bread and the cheese, and straightway closed their helmets. As for the miller, when he saw them thus prepare themselves, he went quickly back into the mill and shut the door thereof, and then went and looked out of the window which was over above where the knights were standing. But King Arthur made very merry unto himself when he perceived that those 2 knights were Sir Gawain and Sir Ewain, for he knew that the one was Sir Gawain, because the crest of his helmet was a leopard rampant, and because he bore upon his shield the device of a leopard rampant upon his field goals. And he knew that the other was Sir Ewain, because he bore upon his crest a unicorn, and because the device upon his shield was that of a lady holding a naked sword in her hand, which same was upon a field oar. Accordingly, whilst he was yet at some distance, King Arthur closed his helmet so that the 2 young knights might not know who he was. So when he had come near to the 2 knights, Sir Gawain rode forward a little distance for to meet him. Sir Knight, quoth he, thou must know that this is soothly perilous ground whereon thou hast ventured, for there is no byway hence across the moors, and thou mayest not go forward without trying a tilt with me. Sir Knight, said King Arthur, and I am very willing to run a tilt with thee. Natheless, I will only encounter thee upon one condition, and that is this, that he who is overthrown shall serve the other entirely for the space of 7 full days. I do accept thy gage, Sir Knight, quoth Sir Gawain, for he said unto himself, of a surety, oh, so exceedingly strong and skillful a knight as I shall easily encompass the overthrow of this unknown knight. So each knight immediately took his appointed station, And having dressed his spear and his shield, and having fully prepared himself in every manner, and having rested for a little space, each suddenly shouted to his horse, and drave spur into the flanks thereof, and so rushed to the encounter, and each knight smote the other in the midst of his defense. And lo, the spear of Sir Gawain burst into fragments, but the spear of King Arthur held, so that Sir Gawain was lifted entirely out of his saddle and over the crupper of his horse, and indeed he fell with a wonderful violence into the dust, nor could he immediately rise from that fall, but lay all bedazed for a little while. And when he did arise, he perceived that the white knight who had overthrown him sat nigh to him upon his horse. Then King Arthur spake and said, Sir knight, I have altogether overthrown thee, and so thou must now serve me accordingly to thy knightly word. Then up spake Sir Ewain, who sat nearby upon his horse. Not so, Sir knight, he said, not so, nor until thou hast had to do with me. For I do make demand of thee that thou shalt straightway joust with me, and if I overthrow thee, I will claim of thee that thou shalt release my cousin from the servitude unto which he has pledged himself. But if thou overthrowest me, then will I serve thee, even as he hath pledged unto himself to serve thee. Sir knight, said King Arthur, I do accept thy gage with all readiness of spirit. So each knight took his assigned place and dressed himself for the encounter, and then they shouted, and they drave together, rushing the one upon the other, like two rams upon the hillside. And the spear of Sir Ewain was also shivered into pieces, but King Arthur's spear held, so that the girths of Sir Ewain's saddle were burst apart, and both the saddle and the knight were swept off the horse's back with such violence that a tower falling could not have made a greater noise than did Sir Ewain when he smote the dust of the causeway. Then Sir Ewain arose to his feet and gazed upon him, all filled with entire amazement. To him came King Arthur, and he bespake himself thus, Ha, Sir Knight, meseems that thou hast been fairly overcome this day, and so according to your promises, both thou and yonder other knight must fill all my commands for the space of full 7 days to come. This is the command that I set upon ye both, that ye shall go straightway, go unto my lady Guinevere at the Camelot, and shall take her greeting from her knight, and ye shall say to her that her knight, unto whom she gave her necklace, hath sent ye, who are king's sons, for to do obedience unto her. And all that she shall command ye to do in the space of these 7 days that they are to come, that ye shall perform unto the smallest grain. Sir knight, said Sir Gawain, so we will do according to thy commands, having pledged ourselves unto thee. But when the 7 days are past, I do make my vow that I shall seek thee out, and shall carry this combat unto its entire extremity. For it may happen to any knight to be unhorsed as I have been, yet I do believe that I have a better success with thee than in a battle with thee in the extremity of this endeavor. Sir knight, said King Arthur, it shall be even as thou desirest. Yet I do verily believe that when these 7 days are past, thou wilt not have such a great desire to fight me as thou hast now. Having so spoken, King Arthur saluted the two knights, and they saluted him, and then he turned his horse and went his way. And whenever he bethought him of how those two good knights had fallen before his assault, and when he thought of how astonished and abashed they had been at their overthrow, he laughed aloud for pure mirth, and vowed unto himself that he never in all of his life engaged in such joyous as an adventure as this. So when Sir Ewain had mended the girths of his saddle, and he and Sir Gawain mounted their horses and betook their way toward Camelot, much cast down in spirits. Then the miller came forth from the mill once more, greatly rejoiced at having beheld such a wonderfully knightly encounter from such a safe place as that from which he had beheld it. And so King Arthur rode onward with great content of mind, and slanting of the afternoon had come, and by that time he had come nigh to the arm of the forest land, which he had in his mind as a proper place where he might leave his horse and his armor. Now as he drew nigh to this part of the forest skirts, he perceived before him at the roadside gnarled and stunted oak tree, and he perceived that upon that oak tree there hung a shield, and that underneath that shield was written the words in fair large letters, "Whose smiteth upon this shield doeth so at the peril of his body." Then King Arthur was filled with a great spirit, and uplifting his spear, he smote upon the shield, so that it rang like thunder. Then immediately King Arthur heard a voice issue out of the forest, crying, "Who hath dared to assault my shield?" And straightway there came out thence a knight of large frame, riding upon a horse white, like that which King Arthur himself rode. And the trappings of the horse and the knight were all white, like unto the trappings of King Arthur and his horse. And the knight bore upon his helmet, as is the crest, was a swan with an outspread wings, and upon his shield he bore the emblazonment of 3 swans upon a field argent. And because of the crest and the emblazonment of the shield, King Arthur knew that this knight was Sir Pellias, who had come with him from Camelot to Tintagel. So when Sir Pellias had come nigh to where King Arthur waited for him, he drew rein and besake him with great sternness of voice. "Ho, ho, Sir Knight," quoted he, "why didst thou dare to smite upon my shield? Verily, that blow shall bring thee great peril and dole. Now prepare to defend thyself straightway because of what thou hast done." "Stay, stay, Sir Knight," said King Arthur. "It shall be thou wouldest have it, and I will do combat with thee. Yet will I not essay this adventure until thou hast agreed that the knight who is to overcome in the encounter shall serve the other in whatsoever manner that the other may desire, for the space of 1 and 7 night from this time." "Sir Knight," said Sir Pellias, "I do accept that risk. Wherefore I bid thee now presently to prepare thyself for the encounter." Thereupon each knight took his station and dressed his spear and shield, and when they had prepared themselves, they immediately launched together with a violence like to 2 stones cast from a catapult. So they met in the midst of the course, and again King Arthur was entirely successful in the assault which he made, for the spear of Sir Pellias burst to pieces, and the spear of King Arthur held, and Sir Pellias was cast with passing violence out of the saddle from the distance of more than a spear's length behind the crupper of his horse. Nor did he altogether recover from that fall for a long time, so that King Arthur had to wait beside him for a considerable while ere he was able to lift himself up from the ground whereon he lay. "Ha, Sir Knight," said King Arthur, "assuredly it hath not gone well with thee this day, for thou hast been entirely overthrown, and thou must straightway redeem thy pledge to serve me for 7 days hereafter. Wherefore I now set it upon thee as my command that thou shalt go straightway into Camelot, and that thou shalt greet the Lady Guinevere from me, telling her that her knight unto whom she gave her necklace hath been successful in battle with thee. Likewise I set it upon thee that thou shalt obey her for the space of 7 days in whatsoever she may command thee to do." "Sir Knight," said Sir Pellias, "it shall even be as thou dost ordain. Yes, I would that I knew who thou art, for I do declare that I have never yet in all my life been overthrown as thou hast overthrown me. And indeed, I think that there are very few men in the world who could serve me as thou hast served me." "Sir Knight," said King Arthur, "sometime thou shalt know that who I am, but as yet I am bound to entire secrecy." Thereupon he saluted Sir Pellias and turned and entered the forest and was gone. And Sir Pellias mounted his horse and betook him to Camelot, much cast down and disturbed in his spirit, yet much marveling who that knight could have been had served him as he had been served. So that day there came to Camelot Sir Geraint, and then Sir Gawain, and then Sir Ewain, and last beheld one another. They were all abased, so that one scarce dared to look at the other in the face. And when they came upon the Lady Guinevere, and made their condition known to her, and told her how that knight who wore her necklace had overthrown them all, and had sent them thither to serve her for 7 a night. And when she reckoned how great and famous were those 4 knights in deeds of chivalry, she was exceedingly exalted that her knight should have approved himself so great in these deeds of arms which he had undertaken to perform. But she greatly marveled who that champion could be, and debated those things in her own mind. For it was a thing altogether unheard of that one knight in one day, and with a single spear, should have overthrown 5 such well-proved and famous knights as Duke Moridont of Northumber, Sir Geraint, Sir Gawain, Sir Ewain, and Sir Pelleas. So she gave herself great joy that she had bestowed the gift of her necklace upon so worthy of a knight, and she was exceedingly uplifted with extraordinary pleasure at the thought of the credit he had endowed her with all. Now, after King Arthur had entered the forest, he came by and by to where those wood choppers afore spoken of piled their craft, and he abided with them for the night. And when the next morning had come, he entrusted them with his horse and armor, charging them to guard those things with all care, and that they should be wonderfully rewarded therefor. Then he took his departure from that place with intent to return unto Camelard, and he was clad in the jerkin of frieze which he had worn ever since he had left Tintagel. And when he had reached the outskirts of the forest, he set his cap of disguise upon his head, and he so resumed his mean appearance once more. So, his knightliness being entirely hidden, he returned to Camelard for to be the gardener's boy, as he had been before. All right, guys, so that was that chapter. The plot thickens with Lady Guinevere and King Arthur. So just put your narrations in your notebooks, and I will see you guys Tuesday. God bless.